I blew 6 accounts before I learned this. I wish I could tell you this started as a noble pursuit. That I began trading with some grand vision of freedom and mastery. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I started because I thought it would be easy money. I thought I could outsmart everyone, make a fortune from my living room, and finally feel like I mattered. Instead, I blew 6 accounts in 2 years. 6. Every time I swore it wouldn't happen again. Every time I promised myself I'd learned my lesson. But the same pattern kept playing out over trading, tilting, chasing losses, destroying everything I'd built. If you've ever felt the sick weight of watching your account vanish, if you've ever wondered what's wrong with you, this story is for you. Because it took me all 6 blow-ups to finally understand what trading really is and who I needed to become to survive it. This story is not financial advice. It's my personal experience, my mistakes, and the lessons I pulled from them. Trading is risky, and you can lose more than you invest. Please do your own research and never trade money you can't afford to lose. Chapter 1. The first deposit. I still remember the way my heart was pounding when I wired the money. It wasn't even a huge amount, just enough to feel serious. Enough to make me believe I was taking a step into something important. The number sat there on the screen, crisp and promising. My first trading account. My first shot at building something of my own. I'd read a few books. Watched a few YouTube videos. Followed a couple of traders on Twitter who posted screenshots of endless green days. I thought that was all I needed, a little knowledge and a lot of confidence. Looking back, I was naive in a way that almost feels sweet. Almost. But there was nothing sweet about what happened next. I opened my platform and stared at the chart. I didn't have a real plan. Not a real one. Just this vague idea that if I watched the candles long enough, I'd somehow feel when to buy and when to sell. The first trade I took was almost accidental. I pressed the button without thinking it all the way through, the way you might flick a lighter just to see the spark. And for a moment, the market moved in my favor. I watched the number turn green, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just excitement. It was validation. All those voices in my head telling me I was wasting my time, that this was ridiculous, that I'd never make it work, went quiet for a few seconds. The profit was small, but it felt like proof. Proof I belonged here. I closed the trade with a few dollars gained, and the dopamine hit was so strong it made me lightheaded. I told myself this was going to be different. That I'd found my path. But the truth was, I hadn't built anything yet. I hadn't earned any clarity or discipline. I'd just been lucky. And luck is the cruelest teacher, because it rewards you before you understand the rules. That night, I lay in bed replaying the trade in my head. The simplicity of it. The rush. The momentary sense that I was in control of something for once in my life. I couldn't have known then that this was the first step into a cycle I wouldn't know how to escape for years. A cycle of hope and desperation. A cycle that would cost me far more than I ever imagined. Chapter 2. Beginner's luck. The first week felt almost too easy. I'd wake up early, still half drunk on optimism, and sit in front of my screen with my coffee cooling untouched. The charts were alive with possibility. Every flicker of price felt like a signal meant just for me. I wasn't thinking about risk. I wasn't thinking about probability. I was thinking about what it would feel like to tell everyone I was making it work. And somehow, the trades kept going my way. Maybe it was the market. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe, for a little while, I really was in sync with the rhythm of it. But whatever the reason, every time I clicked buy, price moved in my favor. By Friday afternoon, my small account was up almost 20%. I remember staring at the balance, feeling like I'd stumbled into a secret room nobody else knew existed. I was already imagining how this would scale. How soon I'd double the account, then double it again. How I'd leave my job and finally live life on my own terms. But I didn't know that the worst thing that can happen to a new trader is to win before you understand why. Because winning, when you haven't built any process, is just fuel for the illusion that you don't need one. Every time I closed a trade in profit, I felt more certain that I had some hidden talent. That the people who struggled were simply overcomplicating it. I remember telling a friend that weekend, I don't know why everyone says trading is so hard. I said it with the smugness only a beginner can muster, the kind that evaporates the moment you taste real uncertainty. That week was the first time I felt invincible. It would not be the last. But it was also the last time trading felt purely exciting. Because once you've seen your account grow like that, it plants a seed. A need to feel it again. A need to keep proving it wasn't luck. And that need would end up costing me far more than any losing trade ever could. Chapter 3. The first real loss. I don't remember exactly what setup I thought I saw that morning. What I do remember is the feeling in my chest when the trade turned red. At first, I told myself it was normal. Just a pullback. Nothing to worry about. I watched the price flicker against me, a few ticks at a time, and felt a tightness in my throat I hadn't felt before. It was like the market was reminding me that the past week had been a gift. And that it was over. But I didn't close the position. I didn't want to. I wanted the chart to come back and prove me right. I wanted the feeling I'd had all week that I knew what I was doing to return. So I held on. I watched the loss grow from small to uncomfortable. From uncomfortable to sickening. It wasn't even a huge amount of money. But it was big enough to crack the illusion I'd been living in. Big enough to show me that this wasn't going to be as simple as I believed. When I finally closed the trade, my hands were shaking. My face was hot with embarrassment, even though no one else was there to see it. The balance on my screen felt like an accusation. Like proof that I'd been naive to think I could skip the hard part and just win. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red number, bright and undeniable. That night, I lay awake replaying every second of the trade. Convincing myself that if I'd just held a little longer, it would have turned around. If I'd been braver, smarter, more patient. But deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't had a plan. I'd just been hoping. And hope is a terrible trading strategy. The first real loss doesn't just take your money. It takes your certainty. It leaves you standing in front of the screen, stripped of your illusions, wondering if you ever knew what you were doing at all. I wish I could say I learned the lesson right then. That I took a step back and rebuilt my approach. But I didn't. I told myself it was just one mistake. That I'd be more careful next time. I didn't know this was only the beginning. That this loss would be the first of many. That I was about to enter a cycle I wouldn't know how to escape. Not yet. Chapter 4. The chase to get even. The morning after that loss, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. I told myself it was just frustration. But the truth was simpler. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd let a single trade shake me so completely. Ashamed that the number in my account wasn't as big anymore. Ashamed that I wasn't who I thought I was. So I did what so many traders do. I decided to fix it. I told myself it was reasonable. That all I needed was one good trade to get back to even. That it would be smarter to clear the loss right away so I could start fresh. But none of that was true. What I really wanted was relief. I wanted to erase the mistake before it became part of my story. I wanted to feel clean again. So I sat down at my desk with the same charts, the same platform, but a completely different mindset. I wasn't trading with curiosity. I was trading with urgency. It felt like something buzzing under my skin. I watched for any setup, any excuse to click the button. The first trade I took wasn't even close to my usual criteria. But in that moment, I convinced myself it was good enough. It went against me almost immediately. Instead of closing it, I doubled the size. I told myself I was averaging in. But really, I was begging the market to save me. By noon, I was down twice as much as the day before. That sick feeling came back, stronger this time. I knew I should stop. But I couldn't. I felt like if I walked away, I was admitting defeat. Admitting that the loss mattered. Admitting that maybe I wasn't cut out for this. So I kept trading. All afternoon, I clicked in and out of positions, each one worse than the last. By the time I finally shut my platform, my account balance was the smallest it had ever been. I remember staring at the number, numb. I couldn't believe how fast it had unraveled. And still, part of me was thinking about tomorrow. About how I'd wake up and try again to erase it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there replaying every decision, feeling the heat of regret in my chest. The chase to get even had cost me more than money. It had cost me my composure. My trust in myself. And worst of all, my illusion that I was in control. Chapter 5. The second account. By the end of that week, the first account was nearly empty. I kept logging in, hoping maybe I'd miscalculated, that somehow the number would be higher. It never was. I remember the shame so vividly, like a cold hand around my throat. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my family. I couldn't stand the idea of them knowing I'd failed so quickly. Instead, I told myself I just needed a fresh start. So I opened a second account. It felt like wiping the slate clean. New login. New funding. New chance to prove that I wasn't reckless, that I could do this right. But in the back of my mind, I knew nothing fundamental had changed. I hadn't taken the time to build a real plan. I hadn't learned to manage risk. I hadn't even given myself space to feel the full weight of what happened. I was running. And I told myself it was discipline. The deposit cleared on a Tuesday morning. I sat there with my finger hovering over the button, telling myself this time would be different. But even before I placed a trade, the fear was there. It was quieter than before, but it hadn't left. The fear that I was about to prove I wasn't cut out for this after all. I promised myself I'd go slow. That I'd only trade the very best setups. that I'd never average into a loser again. But by the second day, I'd broken every one of those promises. It was like watching someone else's hands on my mouse. I'd place a trade and immediately regret it. I'd swear I'd wait for a cleaner signal, but then a flicker of movement would pull me back in. I'd take losses that felt like tiny humiliations and then pile on more risk trying to get relief. At night, I'd lie in bed replaying it all, my heart racing, my chest tight. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of a pattern I'd repeat over and over. Lose. Swear it was the last time. Fund another account. Repeat. Each time I'd tell myself the same story. I just need a clean slate. But no amount of clean slates can save you if you don't change the part of yourself that's driving the chaos. That second account was gone faster than the first. Less than a month. I still remember the moment it hit zero. I felt empty. Not angry. Not shocked. Just hollow, like there was nothing left to feel. And then, almost immediately, a new thought crept in. If I can fund it again, I'll get it right this time. It sounds insane when I say it now. But in that moment, it felt like the only option. The idea of stopping was unbearable. Because if I stopped, I'd have to face everything I'd been avoiding. The fact that I didn't know what I was doing. The fact that I was out of control. The fact that maybe trading wasn't my path. So I didn't stop. I found the money. I opened the third account. And I told myself one more lie. This is the account that will change everything. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Control. The third account started the same way as the first two. With a vow. I told myself I'd be methodical. Patient. Unemotional. I even printed out a checklist entries, exits, risk per trade and taped it above my monitor like some kind of shield against my worst instincts. And for a few days, it actually worked. I traded small size. I waited for clean setups. I felt almost disciplined. But under that thin layer of restraint was the same desperation I hadn't addressed. The desperation to prove I wasn't the kind of person who blew accounts. I started to notice how easily I could justify bending my rules. If a trade looked close enough, I'd convince myself it was fine to take it. If my stop was hit by a few ticks, I'd re-enter right away, telling myself the market was about to turn. Every decision felt rational in the moment. It always does. But looking back, I see exactly what I was doing. I was trying to control something I couldn't. I thought if I worked hard enough, watched long enough, pressed the buttons at just the right second, I could force the outcome I wanted. That's the illusion of control. It feels empowering at first, like you're finally taking charge. But it's a trap. Because when the market doesn't care about your plan, and it never does, you're left with nothing but frustration and shame. The trade that broke that account started innocently. It was a normal setup. Something I'd traded dozens of times in sim. But the moment it went against me, all my discipline vanished. I moved my stop lower. Then lower again. I told myself I just needed to give it space. But really, I couldn't stand being wrong. I couldn't stand the idea that, once again, I wasn't in control. I watched the position drift deeper into red, feeling my stomach tighten. I tried to close it. I really did. But my finger hovered over the button, frozen. Some part of me was still waiting for the market to validate me, to come back and make everything okay. It never did. By the end of that day, the account was down more than 60%. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen washing over me, and felt like a child pretending to be an adult. I'd thought discipline was just about rules. But it's not. Discipline is about accepting that you can't control what happens after you enter the trade. And I wasn't ready to accept that yet. That night, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in slow motion. How easily I'd slipped back into old patterns. How quickly I'd abandoned my checklist when things got uncomfortable. And the worst part wasn't the money. It was the realization that no matter how much I wanted to believe I was in control, I wasn't. The market didn't owe me anything. It didn't care how badly I needed to win. It just was. Unpredictable. Indifferent. Free. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. If I didn't learn to let go of the need to control every tick, I would keep destroying myself, account after account. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. So I found more money. And I told myself again that this time would be different. Even as I knew, deep down, that I was still the same. Chapter 7. The Spiral of Overtrading. By the time I funded the fourth account, something in me had hardened. I was still telling myself this would be the turning point, that I was smarter now, stronger somehow. But beneath all the bravado, I felt hollow. I didn't even feel excitement when the deposit cleared. Just a grim determination to prove I could get it right. Looking back, I can see how tired I already was. Tired of the shame, tired of the pretending, tired of living inside a cycle I didn't know how to stop. But I didn't admit that to myself then. I told myself I just needed to work harder. That was when the overtrading really started. It began small. I'd take a trade that didn't quite meet my criteria. Then another. Then another. Every time, I'd rationalize it. The market is volatile today. This is a momentum opportunity. I'll just risk a little more this time. At first, the losses were manageable. But as the days passed, I started to feel like the only way out was to keep clicking. If I could just find the one big winner, I thought, everything would balance out. But all I was doing was digging deeper. One Thursday, I took 11 trades in a single day. I knew it was too much. I knew I was reacting, not thinking. But I couldn't stop. Every time I closed a loser, I'd feel a moment of panic like I'd been pushed underwater and couldn't breathe until I clicked again. I'd tell myself I was just being proactive. That I was adapting to the market. But the truth was simpler and so much sadder. I was terrified to sit with the feeling of loss. So I traded to distract myself from it. I didn't have any rituals to reset. No boundaries to protect me from myself. Trading was the only place I felt I had a chance to prove I wasn't a failure. And when I was losing, the need to keep trying was stronger than any logic. By the end of that week, my fourth account was nearly gone. I remember staring at the statement. Dozens of trades, most of them impulsive. Small losses that added up to something massive. It didn't even feel real anymore. That weekend, I didn't go out. I didn't answer messages. I sat alone in my apartment, replaying the trades over and over. Every chart felt like an accusation. Every loss felt like a confirmation that I was exactly what I feared. Reckless, incompetent, weak. In that darkness, something started to shift. For the first time, I wondered if I was addicted not just to trading, but to the cycle itself. The rush of entering. The crash of regret. The desperate scramble to make it right. I didn't know yet how to break free. I didn't even know if I could. But a part of me was beginning to see that I was never going to fix this by trying to trade my way out of it. That realization was as terrifying as it was necessary. Because it meant the problem wasn't the market. It was me. Chapter 8. The cost no one talks about. When people talk about blowing accounts, they mostly talk about the money. How much they lost. How long it took to save it. How many months of income vanished in a handful of trades. And yes, the money hurts. But that isn't the part that leaves a scar. The real cost is what happens inside you. The way you start to doubt yourself so completely that you don't recognize the person you've become. After the fourth account was nearly drained, I felt like I was living in a fog. Every morning, I'd sit down and try to convince myself I was okay. That I could still figure this out. That I hadn't already proven, over and over, that I was out of control. But underneath all the rationalizations was a dull ache I couldn't shake. A grief that felt too big to look at directly. I stopped answering calls. When friends asked how trading was going, I'd lie. It's good. Just working on refining my strategy. I couldn't admit to anyone how much I'd lost. How much I'd failed. I couldn't even admit it to myself fully. The worst part wasn't the shame. It was the emptiness that followed. When you blow up an account, there's a weird relief like, at least the tension is over for a moment. But then reality sets in. You see the statements. You remember every impulsive click. You feel the weight of all the hours you spent hoping this time would be different. And you realize you can't go back. No amount of regret refunds the money or erases the damage to your confidence. I remember one night sitting in the dark, the glow of the monitor reflecting off the empty coffee cups littering my desk. I'd been scrolling through my trade history for hours, as if staring at it long enough would change the numbers. My chest felt tight. My hands were cold. I kept thinking about how I'd gotten here. How a few trades for extra income had turned into this obsession that consumed every part of me. The cost wasn't just financial. It was emotional. Mental. Spiritual. I stopped trusting my own judgment. Not just in trading, but in everything. I second-guessed every decision. I felt like I was pretending to be an adult while the real grown-ups managed their lives responsibly. I lost my sense of humor. I lost my curiosity. All I had left was the need to fix what I'd broken. But I didn't know how. People love to say that trading teaches you about yourself. And it does. But they don't warn you that the first thing it shows you is everything you're afraid to see. Your impatience. Your pride. Your desperation to feel important. The mirror doesn't lie. And if you're not ready, it can break you. Looking back, I understand now that this was the moment I reached a crossroads. I could keep pretending I was in control, keep funding new accounts, keep lying to myself. Or I could finally stop running and face the truth. I was the problem. My mindset. My need for validation. My refusal to do the real work of building discipline. But in that moment, I wasn't ready. I still thought another deposit might be the answer. So I did what I'd done before. I found more money. I opened the fifth account. And I told myself, one more time, that this would be different. Chapter 9. The breaking point. By the time I funded the fifth account, something in me had changed. Not in a good way. I wasn't hopeful anymore. I wasn't excited. I felt resigned. Like I was climbing back into a fight I already knew I'd lose. But the alternative, stopping, felt impossible. Because if I stopped, I'd have to feel everything I'd been trying to outrun. The guilt. The regret. The fear that maybe everyone who doubted me was right. So I told myself whatever I needed to hear to justify one more try. This is just part of the learning curve. Every successful trader goes through drawdowns. I'm close. I can feel it. It was amazing, in hindsight, how many lies I could believe to avoid the truth. I remember the first trade I took in that account. It was reckless. I sized up bigger than I ever had. I told myself it was confidence. But it was desperation. The loss hit fast, so fast I felt the blood drain from my face. I didn't close it. I doubled down. It wasn't a strategy. It was a plea. A plea for the market to save me from admitting I'd failed again. By the end of that week, I'd lost nearly half the account. And this time, there was no numbness. Only raw panic. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I'd sit in front of the screen at 3 a.m, scrolling back through the candles, trying to convince myself that if I just found the perfect entry, I could erase it all. It felt like I was fighting for my life. But the only enemy was me. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd been in a losing position for hours, watching it drift farther into red. I knew I should close it. I knew I was past every limit I'd promised to respect. But I couldn't. It felt like if I hit that button, I was admitting I'd wasted 2 years of my life. That all the hope and bravado and borrowed money had been for nothing. My hand was hovering over the mouse, trembling. And then something in me just snapped. I closed the trade. I shut down the platform. And for the first time, I let myself feel exactly what I'd been avoiding. All of it. The shame. The exhaustion. The simple, devastating truth that I couldn't keep going like this. I sat there in the dark, the silence pressing against my chest like a weight. I don't know how long I stayed that way. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade. Long enough to realize that I was tired of lying to myself. I wish I could say that moment was clean. That it was the end of all my bad habits. It wasn't. But it was the first time I admitted that the problem wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the brokers. It wasn't the market. It was me. My refusal to respect risk. My obsession with proving I was special. My need to feel in control. I didn't know yet how to change. But for the first time, I was ready to try. Not to save face. Not to impress anyone. Just to see if there was still a version of me who could trade without destroying everything I touched. Chapter 10. Surrender. The day after I closed that losing trade, I didn't open my platform. I didn't check the charts. I didn't calculate how much I'd lost. I didn't look for the next setup to redeem myself. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall, feeling like I'd come to the end of something. For the first time in 2 years, I let myself consider that maybe I wasn't a trader. Maybe I was just someone who liked the idea of trading more than the reality of it. That thought scared me more than anything. Because trading had become my identity. My proof that I was smart and capable. My hope that I could live life on my own terms. If I walked away, who was I? Someone who tried and failed. Someone who burned through 6 accounts because he couldn't get out of his own way. Someone ordinary. And I hated that idea. But I was too exhausted to keep pretending. I spent that week doing something I hadn't done in a long time. Nothing. No backtesting. No strategy videos. No forums. Just long walks around the neighborhood. Mornings without screens. Afternoons sitting quietly, feeling the grief I'd been running from. It was awful. But in that emptiness, something started to loosen. I began to see that all my frantic trading hadn't been about discipline or ambition. It had been about fear. Fear of being ordinary. Fear of wasting time. Fear of never becoming the person I wanted to be. The market had just been the stage where all those insecurities played out. One morning, I opened my journal and wrote a sentence I'd never dared put on paper before. I don't know what I'm doing. It was the most honest thing I'd ever written about trading. I wasn't in control. I wasn't special. I wasn't on the brink of some breakthrough. I was just a person who didn't want to feel small. That was the first moment of real surrender. Not the surrender that says, I quit, but the surrender that admits, I can't keep doing this my way. I didn't know what came next. Part of me still wanted to fund another account, to take one last shot. But I waited. I sat in the discomfort. Days passed, and the urge to jump back in slowly lost its grip. Eventually, I began to ask a different question. Not, how can I get it all back? But, What would it look like to learn this from the ground up? It was humbling. I had to admit that every shortcut I'd tried was just avoidance. That every time I told myself I didn't need a plan or proper risk management, I was proving exactly why I did. Surrender wasn't about giving up on trading. It was about giving up on the fantasy that I could do it without discipline. That I could skip the part where I learned patience. That I could pretend losses didn't hurt if I just moved fast enough. Looking back, that was the most important moment of my entire journey. Not a big win. Not a breakthrough strategy. Just the quiet acceptance that I had no idea what I was doing and that it was okay to start over. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel relieved. Mostly, I felt empty. But it was the first honest emptiness I'd ever allowed myself. And in that space, something new could finally begin. Chapter 11. Learning how to stop. After that week of doing nothing, I thought I was ready to start again. I told myself I'd be different this time, slower, more deliberate, more professional. But before I funded another account, I did something I'd never done. I made myself a promise. I promised I would learn how to stop. It sounded simple. But for me, it was revolutionary. Because up to that point, stopping had never felt like an option. Every time I took a loss, I felt like I had to fix it right away. Every time I had a win, I felt like I had to prove it wasn't a fluke. Every session bled into the next, no boundaries, no pause, no space to breathe. Stopping felt like failure. Like admitting I didn't have control. Like giving up the chance to prove I was better than my results. But that mindset had destroyed me. So before I traded again, I sat down with a piece of paper and wrote. My first skill is not winning. It's stopping. It felt almost embarrassing to write it. But I knew it was the truth. The first time I practiced stopping on purpose, it felt unbearable. I took a small loss, a normal, planned, contained loss, and instead of clicking back in, I closed my platform. I remember staring at the blank screen, feeling like I was missing something vital. My hands were restless. My mind was frantic. Every part of me wanted to reopen the chart, to find something to trade, to get the feeling of control back. But I didn't. I sat there and felt the discomfort. 15 minutes felt like an hour. But slowly, the panic started to fade. I realized the world hadn't ended. I was still here. The loss hadn't erased my potential. It was just a number. That was the first time I saw how powerful stopping could be. Not as an escape, but as a discipline. A boundary. A line in the sand between reacting and responding. Over the next weeks, I practiced this over and over. If I hit my max loss, I stopped. If I felt the urgency to make it back, I stopped. If I caught myself trading just to feel something, I stopped. At first, I failed often. I'd tell myself I was done, only to find my cursor hovering over the buy button an hour later. But every time I caught it, even if it was late, I felt a little stronger. A little more in control of myself, if not the market. Learning how to stop didn't make me profitable overnight. It didn't erase the losses or heal the shame. But it did something even more important. It showed me I could trust myself, even in small ways. That I could have an impulse and not act on it. That I could feel discomfort and let it pee back without trying to trade it away. Some nights, I still lay awake thinking about all the money I'd burned. But for the first time, I felt like maybe it hadn't been wasted if it taught me this one lesson. Discipline isn't about perfection. It's about knowing when to step back before you destroy everything you've built. One evening, after a long day where I hadn't taken a single trade, I closed my laptop and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I'd won. Not because I'd proven anything. But because I'd finally learned to stop. And in that stillness, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could learn the rest too. Chapter 12. The first plan that worked. It took me longer than I like to admit to even consider making a real plan. Not a list of half-formed ideas scribbled in a notebook. Not a vague intention to trade better. A real plan, clear rules, defined risk, and something I could actually measure. The idea intimidated me. Because deep down, I knew that as long as I didn't have a plan, I could pretend the problem wasn't me. I could blame the market. The broker. The news. But if I had a plan and still failed, I'd be out of excuses. That terrified me. But after blowing 5 accounts, my fear of repeating the same mistakes finally became stronger than my fear of trying differently. So I did something I'd never done before. I stopped trading completely for a month. I spent every day studying. Not just strategies, but my own journals. I went through every trade I'd taken and looked for patterns. Where did I overtrade? When did I ignore my stops? Why did I keep adding size when I was losing? It was humiliating to see it all laid bare. But it was also clarifying. Because for the first time, I could see that my problem wasn't bad luck. It was me. My lack of structure. My addiction to chasing. My refusal to accept small losses before they became disasters. At the end of that month, I sat down and wrote my first real plan. It was embarrassingly simple. A single setup. Fixed risk per trade. Maximum daily loss. 3 trades per day, no exceptions. I remember staring at the page when I finished, feeling like I'd just drawn a map out of a labyrinth I'd been lost in for years. It didn't feel exciting. It felt grounding. Like I finally had something solid to stand on. The first week I traded that plan, everything felt different. I wasn't scanning 20 charts, desperate for something to click. I wasn't jumping in and out of positions every 15 minutes. I was waiting. Watching. Trusting that if my setup appeared, I would know exactly what to do. The first trade I took was a small loss. And for once, I didn't feel the panic rising in my throat. Because I knew the loss was part of the design. Part of the cost of doing business. The next trade was a small win. Then another. By the end of the week, my account was up slightly. But more importantly, I hadn't deviated once from the plan. I remember sitting there on Friday evening, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not because I'd made money. But because I'd proven to myself that I could follow through. That was the first time I understood what discipline really felt like. Not rigid. Not suffocating. Steady. I realized I'd spent so long searching for the perfect strategy because I didn't want to face the truth. No strategy works without consistency. And consistency only comes from commitment. The plan didn't make me rich overnight. It didn't erase the damage I'd done. But it gave me something I hadn't had since the very beginning. Hope grounded in reality instead of fantasy. If you had asked me then if I was confident, I would have told you no. But for the first time, I believed I could learn. And that was enough to keep going. One day at a time. One trade at a time. Chapter 13. The Quiet Months. After I finished that first week trading my plan, something in me started to shift. I wasn't celebrating like I used to. No euphoric rush after a green day. No frantic self-judgment when I closed a loser. Mostly, I just felt calm. It was unfamiliar. Part of me missed the adrenaline. Missed the feeling that every trade was life or death. But another part, the part that was finally exhausted by the chaos, felt relief. Those next few months were the quietest of my trading life. I stopped trying to make every day exciting. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I made in a single session. Instead, I just showed up, did the work, and logged off. It sounds simple when I say it now. But at the time, it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. Because without the drama, there was nothing left to distract me from the truth. Most of trading is waiting. Most of progress is invisible. And most of success is boring. I remember one stretch in particular, a full 3 weeks without a significant trade. Every morning, I'd open my charts. I'd watch for my setup. And every day, I'd see nothing worth taking. Before, that kind of stillness would have driven me crazy. I would have forced trades just to feel like I was accomplishing something. But now, I practiced patience like it was a skill in itself. Some days, I'd close my platform after an hour and go for a walk. At first, I felt guilty like I was wasting time. But slowly, I started to see those quiet days differently. They weren't empty. They were proof I was finally capable of restraint. I didn't tell many people what I was doing. Most of them had stopped asking. Some probably assumed I'd quit altogether. But that was okay. For the first time, I didn't need anyone's approval to keep going. I wasn't trading to impress anyone anymore. Not even myself. It was in those quiet months that I began to understand the real work wasn't in finding the perfect trade. It was in building the discipline to do nothing when there was nothing to do. One evening, after another day of no trades, I sat down and looked through my old journals. Page after page of frantic entries. Had to get it back. Can't believe I lost again. Tomorrow I'll figure it out. And now here I was, months later, with fewer trades and fewer emotional meltdowns. I hadn't made much money yet. But I also hadn't blown up an account. That felt like progress worth acknowledging. I started to see my trading differently. Not as a way to prove something. Not as a performance. But as a craft. Something to approach with humility. Something to respect. I won't pretend it was easy. There were days I felt the old urgency flare up, the itch to do something, anything to feel like I was moving forward. But every time, I came back to my plan. Every time, I asked myself the same question. Is this trade part of the process, or just a way to avoid sitting with discomfort? Most of the time, the answer was clear. And most of the time, I chose to wait. Those months taught me that progress isn't always measured by profit. Sometimes, the truest measure is how willing you are to do nothing until the right opportunity comes. Looking back, I think of those days as the beginning of real change. Not because I was winning big. But because, Finally, I was learning how to be steady. Chapter 14. The first signs of consistency. It's strange how consistency doesn't announce itself. There's no fireworks. No big epiphany that everything has clicked. It arrives quietly. One day you look back and realize you haven't done anything self-destructive in a while. No revenge trades. No doubling down on losers. No frantic attempts to win everything back in a single afternoon. Just steady days, some green, some red, all within the plan. For me, that realization came one Friday evening. I was going over my journal, expecting to see the usual string of chaos. Instead, I found something that almost shocked me. Weeks of clean trades. Entries that matched my rules. Risk that stayed exactly where I'd planned it. Losses that ended at the stop, not 10 times past it. It wasn't spectacular. I hadn't made a fortune. But it was consistent. And after everything I'd been through, that felt like a bigger accomplishment than any single winning streak. I remember closing the journal and just sitting there for a long time. There was no adrenaline. No panic. No shame. Just a quiet sense of respect for how far I'd come. But consistency didn't mean I stopped feeling fear. It didn't mean I never doubted myself. Most mornings, I still felt that familiar tension in my chest as I opened my platform. What if today I slipped back into old habits? What if this fragile steadiness was just temporary? What if I was still the same person who'd blown 6 accounts? I didn't have answers to those questions. And I learned that I didn't need them. All I needed was to show up, follow my process, and let the results take care of themselves. One day, I had a trade that went against me fast. 6 months earlier, I would have lost control. Moved the stop. Added size. Chased a dozen other trades to erase the feeling. This time, I did none of that. I watched the trade hit my stop. I logged it. And I walked away. It was so ordinary that I almost missed how big it was. That moment was proof I'd changed. Not because I'd made money, but because I hadn't abandoned myself when things went wrong. That night, I wrote in my journal. Today I did what I said I would do. It was the simplest sentence I'd ever written about trading. And maybe the most important. People think consistency is about results. But I've learned it's about identity. It's about deciding you are someone who respects your plan no matter what the market does. In those weeks, something started to heal in me. The shame I'd been carrying for years began to soften. The voice that always told me I was reckless and incompetent got quieter. I started to trust myself again, not completely, but enough. Enough to keep showing up without fear that I'd sabotage everything. That was when I finally understood why so many traders never make it past the early failures. Because it's not just about money. It's about the part of you that has to believe you can change. That you can learn to be different. That you can build a version of yourself who doesn't need chaos to feel alive. Consistency wasn't the finish line. It was the foundation. The place I could finally start building something real. Not because I'd conquered every weakness, but because I was finally willing to be patient with myself. I wish I could tell you that after that, everything was easy. It wasn't. But for the first time, I had proof that steady progress was possible. And that was enough to keep going. Chapter 15. The day I knew I'd made it. It wasn't a big win that told me I'd made it. It wasn't some perfect trade that captured the entire move. It wasn't a number in my account. It was a single, ordinary day. One of those sessions where nothing much happened. I woke up early, as usual. Made coffee. Sat at my desk and watched the market open. There were no fireworks. No urgency in my chest. No voice in my head whispering that I had something to prove. Just a quiet readiness to do my job. That morning, I took one trade. A clean setup I'd seen hundreds of times by then. It moved a little in my favor, then drifted back to my stop. A small, planned loss. I felt it. Of course I'm not made of stone. But there was no panic. No rush to get it back. No flicker of shame that used to rise up like a wave. I logged the trade. I sat for a moment, watching the chart. And then I did something I could never have imagined 2 years earlier. I shut down my platform. I stood up. And I walked away. That was it. No drama. No meltdown. No desperate scramble for another entry. Just acceptance. I spent the rest of that day doing ordinary things. Reading. Cooking. Laughing with people I cared about. When I thought about the market later, it was with the same neutrality I might feel remembering the weather. It felt like proof that I'd finally detached my worth from every tick of price. I knew then, in a way that didn't need words, that I'd become someone different. Not perfect. Not immune to mistakes. But steady. Consistent. Able to feel loss without letting it define me. That evening, I sat down with my old journals. The ones full of panic and regret and promises I never kept. I read through the pages, feeling a strange gratitude. Because all that chaos, all those blown accounts, all the nights I thought I'd ruined everything, it all led me here. To this simple day. To this quiet steadiness. I wrote one last entry in that old notebook before I packed it away. Today was nothing special. And that's what makes it everything. People think success in trading is about big wins. But real success is when you no longer need the wins to feel whole. When you can take a loss and still trust yourself. When you can close the platform and still like the person you are when the screen goes dark. I won't pretend I never slip. There are still days when old habits tap me on the shoulder. But I know now that discipline isn't about never feeling the urge. It's about having the strength to feel it, and not obey it. That's how I knew I'd made it. Not because I'd mastered the market. But because I'd finally learned to master myself. I blew 6 accounts before I learned that. 6. And I wouldn't wish that path on anyone. But in a way, I'm grateful for every failure. Because each one stripped away a layer of illusion until all that was left was the truth. Trading isn't about being right. It's about being honest. Honest about what you can control. Honest about what you can't. Honest about who you're willing to become. If you're still in the middle of your own chaos, I hope this story reminds you of one thing. You can change. You can learn. And if you're willing to do the work, you can build something steady out of the wreckage. One trade at a time. One day at a time. If you're still listening, maybe some part of you recognizes pieces of your own journey and mine. The rush of the first wins. The shame of the first losses. The endless cycle of trying to trade your way out of the hole. Maybe you've blown 1 account. Maybe more. Maybe you're still telling yourself that the next deposit, the next strategy, the next day will be the one that changes everything. I understand. Because I've been there. And I know how convincing the illusion can be. But here's what I learned the hard way. No amount of funding will fix what you refuse to face. No system can save you if you can't follow it. No plan matters if you don't respect it when it hurts to do so. I used to think discipline was something you either had or you didn't. But that's not true. Discipline is built in the smallest decisions. Closing the trade when you want to hold. Walking away when you want to chase. Logging your losses without shame. One choice at a time. One day at a time. If you're in the middle of blowing account after account, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to tell you it doesn't have to stay that way. You can learn. You can change. You can become the trader you keep imagining. But only if you stop trying to outrun the discomfort. Only if you finally sit still long enough to tell the truth. If this story spoke to you, I'd invite you to do one thing before you move on to the next video, the next article, the next trade. Pause. Ask yourself honestly. What part of me is still trying to prove something? What would happen if I stopped fighting and started learning? Write it down. And if you feel like sharing, leave a comment with one thing you're committed to changing. Sometimes, saying it out loud is the first step to making it real. Thank you for spending this time with me. I blew 6 accounts before I learned what discipline really is. If I could go back, I'd tell that younger version of myself one thing. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to fail, as long as you don't lie to yourself about why. Wherever you are in your journey, I hope you remember. Trading will test you, over and over. But the person you become in the process, that's the real profit. If you'd like, I can help you craft a title, thumbnail idea, or a short quote to end the video.